The city streets began to empty. Guards that had been holding back the chaotic crowds returned to their fixed posts, and an unnerving sense of absolute normality settled across the blood-stained courtyard, as if the horrific execution had been nothing more than a passing breeze. Rian had made his way across to where the brutal altercation had just transpired, swiftly hiding himself down one of the narrow alleyways that stood adjacent to the main streets. He leaned against the damp brickwork, listening intently for any signs of approaching guards or civilian stragglers. As soon as the surrounding area sounded quiet enough, he slipped out of the shadows and made his way back toward the dungeons. It did not take long for him to arrive at his grim destination. Thanks to the hour being so early, even the men assigned to morning guard duty were sparsely located along the perimeter. The way into the depths was completely clear. Descending the steep stone steps once again, he made sure to rip one of the burning torches from its iron bracket on the wall, knowing all too well how darkly lit the interior vault was. Holding the flame high in front of him, he reached the familiar sight of the dungeon's first subterranean room. Nothing had changed at first glance except for one glaring detail. The prisoner who was supposed to be rocking in the far cell was entirely missing. The dirty hay lay empty. This must have been the elf who got executed. Rian whispered to himself, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He turned away from the empty cage. Eventually, he walked up to the chamber on his right and halted dead in his tracks, instantly aware that the space was not as vacant as it had once been. There, standing directly beside the iron cell of the elven woman, was a lone soldier, leaning close to the bars and whispering in deep conversation. "Garth!" Rian exclaimed, the torchlight flickering wildly. This was the last person he had expected to run into down here in the dark. Varric, maybe, or even any of the other bloodthirsty soldiers, but never Garth. Perhaps the boy had fled to the dungeons after witnessing the horror at the gates. But there was something else. Rian's eyes dropped to Garth's hands. He was actively sliding a solid object between his fingers, letting the frayed piece of twine that was attached to it dangle loosely over his knuckles. Is he trying to release the prisoner? The frantic thought jumped instantly into Rian's mind. He stepped forward hastily, bringing the bright orange glare of the torch further into the damp room. "Oh, sir, didn't see you there," Garth stammered, his face instantly draining of whatever little color it had left. He pulled his hands back violently, grasping whatever he held tightly against his chest to hide it from view. Adora was pressed flat against the front of the cage. Her slender hands were gripping the iron bars of the gate, her crystal green eyes fixed entirely on Rian. The moment the light hit his face, she froze. "What's that?" Rian asked Garth directly, his eyes nodding sharply toward the boy's hidden hand. "This? Nothing, sir. Just a trinket," Garth muttered back, his eyes darting nervously to Adora before shifting back to the floor. A heavy silence fell over the room. The only sound was a quiet, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of moisture weeping through the masonry from the world outside. What in the hell is going on here? Rian thought, his mind racing. It was transparently clear that Garth was hiding something of immense importance, but for whatever reason, the boy refused to share it. Rian felt the urge to demand answers, but looking at Garth's trembling frame, he decided not to push. Not yet. Instead, Rian looked between them. "Did you witness what just happened outside at the gates?" he asked softly. "I did, unfortunately," Garth replied, his voice shaking slightly as the memory resurfaced. It wasn't great, was it, sir?" Rian turned his attention fully toward Adora, the guilt from the battlements weighing heavily on his shoulders. "I am sorry for your friend," Rian muttered, his voice hollow. "It was completely unjust." "Why didn't you stop it?" Adora interjected suddenly, her voice cutting through the damp air like steel. Stunned by the sudden outburst, Rian recoiled slightly, taking a long second to think of how to even respond. "Me? What could I have done?" he said back, feeling the sting of his own helplessness. At his words, Adora's tense, rigid frame began to noticeably soften. She slowly let go of the cold iron bars, sliding down into a crouched posture that was identical to the one Rian had seen her in before, vulnerable, broken, and profoundly weak. Her unblinking eyes settled intensely on Garth, entirely bypassing Rian, even though he was the one actively asking the questions. A bizarre, alienating sensation washed over him. He felt entirely excluded from an unspoken understanding that he had interrupted not moments ago. "Never mind," she said weakly from the shadows. "It's pointless now." Garth stood frozen in the same spot he had occupied since Rian entered, the sheer weight of the confrontation filling him with visible dread and unease. Desperate to escape, he moved to take himself out of the situation entirely. I'll leave you guys to it, sir." Before Rian could put out a hand to stop him, Garth turned on his heel and was gone, his footsteps echoing rapidly up the stone stairwell. Secretly, Rian felt a profound pang of regret. He deeply wished Garth had stayed. The one solitary person he felt was being genuinely truthful with him since he woke up was now acting completely estranged. "Not you too," Rian sighed internally. "He's nice, your friend there," Adora said softly from the dirt. Rian stepped closer to the rusted bars, the torch casting long shadows behind him. "Garth? Yeah, he seems like a genuinely good guy." "You really don't know, do you?" she answered, her voice sounding unfeigned and deeply confused. "Well, I have been quite confused and lost recently," Rian admitted, a self-deprecating smile gracing his features. "Isn't that the truth?" she replied, slowly pushing her body up onto her knees. As she rose, her thick hair fell gracefully behind her shoulders, completely revealing her elongated, elegant elven ears. Rian, however, did not focus on them at first. He was instantly distracted by the piercing intensity of her vibrant green eyes again. "She's beautiful." The intrusive thought flashed through his mind before he forcefully shook it out of his head, reminding himself of where they were. "What exactly can you remember then?" she asked him, her tone dropping its hostility. Rian placed his free hand onto his head, gently scuffing the short hair near the edge of his original head wound. "Not much, unfortunately. Almost nothing before waking in the solar." She tracked the movement of his fingers, her eyes catching the jagged cut just below the missing patch of hair. But as the bright orange torchlight illuminated the side of his head, the wound wasn't the thing that caught her attention. Adora took in a sharp, horrified gasp, her jaw dropping. "Your ears!" She acted with a sudden, overwhelming surge of genuine concern that caught Rian completely off guard. He had never given a single thought to the minor injuries he might have received to his own hairline, primarily because they caused him absolutely no physical pain. "Oh yeah," Rian said, letting out a false, nervous laugh to break the tension. "Must have banged these up pretty badly too when I was attacked on the ridge." Adora violently threw her body against the iron gates, her hands gripping the bars once more with terrifying intensity. "No, you weren't attacked!" she yelled, her voice cracking under the sheer weight of how profoundly upset and desperate she was. Rian's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" A dry cough suddenly cut him off from the absolute darkness of the far corner behind him. Ahem! Someone who had been stooped incredibly low in the deep shadows of the vault began to slowly, deliberately step forward into the light. Once the flickering torch bathed the stranger in its orange glow, the severe, wrinkled features immediately stood out. "Zarek!" Rian gasped, his breath catching. Adora took an involuntary, terrified step backwards into the depths of her cell, covering herself entirely in the gloom. The face of the familiar old advisor should have given Rian a sense of comfort, but right now he felt nothing but a creeping, puzzling dread. "How long have you been standing there?" Rian asked the old man, his voice tightening. "Just right now, son," Zarek replied smoothly, lifting the hem of his heavy robes slightly from the damp floor before letting them fall back into the dirt. The old man slowly, deliberately walked into the narrow space between Rian and the iron cell, standing as a physical barrier between them as he stared blankly at both. "What did she mean, Zarek?" Rian pressed, pointing a finger toward the cell. "What did she mean when she said I wasn't attacked?" Now, son," Zarek said softly, his voice dripping with an artificial, calming warmth. "We shouldn't go believing every single thing we hear from desperate prisoners. Now should we?" Rian looked past the old man's shoulder toward Adora, who was cowering silently in the deep shadows of the cage. "If she had asked you to free her right now," the old man continued, his eyes locking onto Rian's with an intense weight, "would you still question her words as wisdom or as dangerous folly?" The words carried the outward structure of sound advice, but a sudden, violent warning flared in Rian's heart. A strong part of him wanted to use his rank to fiercely order the old man out of the cells and demand to be left alone with the prisoner. He was the general. Surely he possessed that absolute military authority. But as he stood there, the tragic realization washed over him that he was not the one in charge. He had never been in charge. He was merely a passenger, blindly following the suit of whatever the people around him said or did. Zarek stepped closer, placing a comforting hand firmly onto Rian's shoulder. The moment the old man's palm contacted his armor, the spike of intense panic that had gripped him moments ago began to unnaturally ease, his mind smoothing out into a dull compliance. "I am truly sorry, you know," Zarek muttered compassionately, "for all of this terrible confusion. It must be so incredibly difficult for you right now." From the shadows of the cell, Adora made a sudden, sharp scoffing noise, clearly mocking the old man's display of sympathy. I just wish all of this was over. Or that it wasn't happening at all," Rian replied, his voice dropping as he felt the desperate urge to fight suddenly drained completely from his body. "I don't know anymore." "You just don't see it, do you?" Adora said to the room, her voice laced with pity. "See what?" Rian asked, but as he spoke he felt Zarek's grip on his shoulder tighten with a subtle pressure. The elven woman looked directly at Zarek's hand on his shoulder, her jaw tightening, and she fell completely silent once more. "Listen to me, son," Zarek instructed gently, guiding Rian's torso away from the bars. "You shouldn't come back down here anytime soon. It will only serve to upset your mind even more, you hear?" Rian nodded in slow agreement, though deep down, he could not guarantee how he would truly feel in the hours to come. He felt Zarek pushing him gently toward the exit archway, and both men began to slowly head up the weeping corridor. "Anyway," Zarek chattered casually as they walked, "your Vanguard and Varric are desperately looking to talk to you. They firmly believe an elven attack is imminent. In fact, I think they want to make the first move." The moment the words left Zarek's mouth, Adora violently lunged at the iron bars behind them one final time, her voice screaming out into the vaulted ceiling, "Liar!" Rian was already past the point of turning back to see her, his boots moving mechanically through the first row of empty cells. To his surprise, Garth was standing patiently at the opposite end of the dungeon threshold, seemingly waiting for them to emerge from the dark. "Ah, young Garth, thank you for waiting for us," the old man said cheerfully. Garth looked up at the two of them, his expression a chaotic mix of confusion and deep terror. "Sir?" he uttered, his eyes locked onto Rian before shifting intensely to the old man. "How did you—" Rian began to ask Garth, wanting to know what he had been hiding. Crash. A deafening screech of buckled metal and iron mail rang out from the courtyard directly above their heads, shattering the sentence. Without another word shared between them, the three men broke into a sprint, hurrying up the stone stairwell to investigate the chaos. They burst through the exit into the pale morning light just as a frantic group of armed town guards arrived to investigate the scene. Leaning awkwardly, grotesquely against the stone wall to their left was one of the guardsmen assigned to the dungeon entrance. It was instantly clear from the unnatural posture that the man was stone dead. A single elegant arrow protruded sharply from the center of his chest, driven directly through the iron plate armor just above where the heart would be. Thick droplets of dark crimson blood were pouring out of the punctured metal, pooling on the masonry. Rian dropped to his knees in the dirt, instinctively reaching out to feel for a pulse regardless of the obvious fatality. The flesh was already turning cold. "What happened here?" Rian yelled at the gathering crowd of onlookers behind him. "Who saw this?" There was no response. The civilians simply stared with blank, hollow expressions. Garth dropped to his knees on the opposite side of the corpse, his hands trembling violently as he studied the fatal wound. Slowly, his slender fingers reached out, gently tracing the elegant fletching of the protruding shaft. "That arrow," Garth whispered to himself, his voice dropping to a terrified octave. "What is it? What's wrong with it?" Rian asked immediately, leaning closer. Not expecting Rian to have heard him, Garth stuttered violently, his eyes snapping away from the wound to avoid Rian's intense gaze. "Nothing, sir. It's nothing." Rian stood up, his eyes scanning the windows of the surrounding stone buildings. Surely someone in broad daylight must have witnessed the assassin. But as he studied the faces of the men and women standing around the perimeter, he found nothing but the same vacant, unbothered stares. Was no one in this city upset about one of their own soldiers being brutally murdered in the heart of the fortress? A truly terrible thing, for sure, Zarek said, stepping casually around the pool of blood and lifting his weathered face to study the motionless orange sky. Whoever committed this atrocity clearly wanted a war. Finally, 2 low-ranking soldiers rushed past the onlookers, gently barging past a kneeling Rian and Garth. They proceeded to lift the mail-clad corpse by its shoulders and boots, carrying it slowly through the quiet courtyard toward the armory doors. "What in the hell is this?" Varric suddenly burst through the crowd, his massive frame radiating pure fury. He stood with his heavy hands planted firmly on his hips, studying the smear of blood on the wall, trying to piece together the tactical situation. "Are the bastards attacking?" He turned sharply, pointing a massive finger at one of the senior soldiers to his right. "You there! Take 4 men immediately and patrol the eastern gatehouse and its surroundings." He then snapped his frame around, pointing to a further 4 soldiers to his left. "You lot, head directly to the southern gate where those damn delegates were standing. Look for any signs of one of them having made their way inside the curtain wall. Search high, search low, I don't care how you do it. Just bring me something to kill. Go." The chosen men took off hastily, their iron boots clattering violently against the stone paths as they rushed to their operational positions. Rian and Garth quickly got to their feet. "Varric, what if—" Rian began to speak, attempting to inject a note of tactical caution. "Enough!" Varric swerved around, raising a firm hand directly into Rian's face to cut him off. "I have had it up to here with your indecisiveness, General. If you can't do what needs to be done for this city, then I will." Varric turned his back on Rian, facing the remaining company of soldiers. "Men, gather your forces, every single one of them. Meet within this courtyard in exactly 2 hours." The giant knight turned his scarred face back to glare at Rian, a savage glint in his eyes. "We attack them. No prisoners this time. No sneaking around in the dark. Just good old-fashioned bloody battle." The ranks of soldiers behind him let out a roaring cheer, raising their iron fists into the crisp morning air in a unified display of violence. "This is not what I want," Rian thought desperately, a wave of suffocating emotion wrapping around his throat. "This is entirely wrong." But he felt far too overcome, far too paralyzed by the strange momentum of the city to stop the gears of war from turning. Varric began to walk away toward the barracks before stopping firmly in his tracks. He turned around, heading directly back toward Rian with an aggressive stride. Reaching out, his massive hand clamped down onto Rian's forearm with crushing force. "You are coming out there with us, sir," Varric growled, his face inches away. "And so is your little elf lady down in the dirt. Her and her precious kin. If they don't help guide our blades through the uncharted lands ahead, well, I think you know exactly what will happen to them." Varric smirked, a cruel, twisted expression. Beside him, one of his personal guards looked at Rian, raised a finger, and made a slow, graphic slitting gesture across his own throat, letting out a low chuckle. The officers stormed off into the distance, Varric's booming voice aggressively shouting logistical orders until the sound finally faded from hearing. Garth remained standing perfectly still in the dirt, nervously rubbing his hands together as his wide eyes tracked the soldiers walking away. Zarek stood beside them, his frail fingers twisting the whiskers of his long beard, buried deep in silent thought. Rian, however, seemed to physically shrink away. He felt smaller in that moment than he ever had, smaller even than the frail old man standing at his shoulder. In the dark spaces of his fractured mind, a harrowing question began to repeat. Did I cause this? What did the old me do to unleash so much pain and misery upon this world? Nevertheless, looking out at the iron gates, a profound intuition settled deep within his soul. He knew with absolute certainty that this time, leaving the high stone walls of Nostrador was going to be his last. He might never return to this city alive. In fact, he realized with a strange sense of clarity, even if his vanguard forces were to prevail in the bloodbath to come, he might choose not to return at all.